I would like to welcome all of you in this program. And first of all, let me thank you, the Ministry of Health, Government of Nepal, John Hopkins University, Action Nepal, and the Union, on behalf of Naya Patrika, for letting us to be a media partner in this event. So we thank you for letting us to be a media partner. As we know, the program in this public health is most important, and we are very much eager to work with you. As we know, coming together is a beginning, and being together is a progress, and working together is a success. We are here to work together and committed to fight against the tobacco, and we are here and we discuss about the issues related to the tobacco. Let me start the program. So we are going to start. I would like to request Dr. Rajendra Panta. He is the Director General of Department of Health Services, Ministry of Health. He will chair the program.
Good morning, everybody.
And we have Honorable Ranju Thakur. She is the Chairperson of Parliamentary Committee of Women, Children, Senior Citizen and Social Welfare. She is the chief guest of this program. So we will discuss on the issues. For that, we are going to set the ground for the discussion. So I would like to request Professor Steve Taplin. He is the professor of John Hopkins University. He will have brief remarks in the issues.
Okay, thank you very much.
As you probably know, we're here this week to engage in a leadership development program, and we stress the importance of leadership in that program at all levels, particularly with regard to tobacco control, which is a very complex project or problem that cuts across disciplines and sectors and ministries and so forth. So in that context, everyone at all levels has an opportunity to exert leadership, not just the person at the top. But having said that, leadership and collaboration and coordination at high levels in government and private sector organization is particularly important if we want to bring about change. In this context, as we discuss some of the examples of where leadership at high levels have been important, we've reflected on a number of issues, a number of situations. But quite recently in the Philippines, for example, in promoting and legislating a new tax on tobacco and alcohol products, it was not the Ministry of Health that led the fight. It was the Assistant Secretary of Finance who was the key individual working in collaboration with the Secretary of Health, non-governmental organizations, and tobacco control advocates who brought about that change. An example for me that is closer to home is what I would say is the rather extraordinary level of ministerial participation in our leadership program. So far, we've had the Minister of Health, we've had the General Secretary of the South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation. We've had the Minister of Agriculture who stopped by. We have plans to have the Minister of Industry, and I forget the rest of the title, but Minister of Industry will be here, and the Minister of Education. In the context of these programs, which we've been conducting over the last 10 years, this is extraordinary. This is almost beyond imagination. And I was particularly impressed by the fact that our colleague Tara told me, look, he said, all these people you're in the midst of a local election, and all of these folks are sometimes on opposing political parties. So in terms of politics, they're like this, but in terms of tobacco control, everyone is together. And that's basically what we're looking for when we talk about leadership, is bringing people together, irrespective of their political convictions, but around issues that are important to the public good. So what we stress is that leaders don't do things that are easy. Even though you may be a leader, you do some easy things, but you also do difficult things. And then sometimes you do impossible things. And that's the challenge that we put forth. Later in the program, my colleague Ben Lazara will talk about the development of a strategic leadership mindset. And we hope that you'll find those comments helpful as we proceed into the discussion. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to participate in this discussion of tobacco control.
Thank you, Professor. He is going to promote Gyan Swan. He is the director of the union, and he will have brief remarks.
And
On behalf of the International Union Against TB and Lung Disease, I know Dr. Tara Singh Ban has been working quite closely, people around the table here on tobacco control in Nepal, and I just want to, on behalf of the union, to congratulate the progress you have made in many areas of tobacco control, in smoke-free, tax ban, banning tobacco industry interference, so on and so forth. And we very much look forward to continue this collaboration and provide any kind of support that's needed from the union side. I recall from yesterday's presentation by a representative from Nepal that there is a policy proposal to increase the tobacco tax level from the current 28% to the WHO recommended 70%. Just want to endorse the union's full support of this particular proposal. As many of you around this table know, tobacco tax, increasing tobacco tax, is considered to be the most effective measure to cut down on smoking. I understand the country is still in many ways recovering from the devastating earthquake back in 2015. When I was working on tobacco control in my home country in China, we had a similar very serious earthquake back in 2008, and tens of thousands of people lost their lives. When I was talking about tobacco control in my country, I always compare the number of people die every year from smoking to the number of people who die from the devastating earthquake. I think same is true in Nepal. If I remember correctly, close to 9,000 people died from the earthquake in 2015. But if you look at the number of people die from tobacco smoking in Nepal is almost 3 times as high as that number. It's about 25,000 people every year lost their lives from tobacco smoking. So I think there's every reason for us to take effective measures to curb the tobacco epidemic in this country. And tobacco tax is the most important measure. It is considered a win-win solution to curb tobacco smoking. From the economic perspective, it's a very effective way to raise fiscal revenue. As I know, Nepal is in a great way of recovering from the economic loss from the earthquake in 2015, and raising tobacco tax can be a very important, large source of fiscal revenue for the government. And the second wins really come from the Ministry of Health. Saving lives is one aspect of it, but the second aspect is really fewer people will get sick from tobacco-related diseases, and this really saves a lot of health costs for the Ministry of Health. And the second and the third win really comes from the smokers' perspective. I'm not quite sure about the situation in Nepal, but at least in my country, many smokers coming from the poor family, once they get cancer and other serious diseases, this will be a huge economic burden for the family, and many families become impoverished from tobacco-related diseases. And raising tobacco tax can help these people down on smoking and save the economic expenditures, maybe spent on other things, education, food, and so on and so forth. So I just want to mention one more point, which is about the tobacco companies. When we talk about raising tobacco tax, we always hear different opinions, opposition from the tobacco companies, whose primary, if not the only interest, is to sell cigarettes, is to get people continue to smoking. So if you look at the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, one of the most important provisions or measures is to keep tobacco companies out of the discussions of any public health policy, especially tobacco control policy. So it's really, really paramount in the Nepal case. When you discuss tobacco tax increase, the tobacco companies' opinion shouldn't be taken into consideration. That's very important. We know there is Article 5.3, which is keeping tobacco industry interference out of public health policy making. There's a policy in Nepal, but we need to make sure the policy is well implemented when it comes to tobacco tax discussion. These are just very brief points that I would like to make, and again, very much appreciate the opportunity to be engaged in this discussion.
Thank you, Doctor. After these brief remarks, we are going to move forward to some extended presentation. So I would like to request Professor Benjamin Lozare. He is going to present the issue on developing a strategic leadership mindset. His presentation will last for 15 years.
Thank you. Namaskar. Warmest good morning to all of you. It's always nice to be back in Nepal, a country I first visited about 40 years ago. And I've been coming almost every year, sometimes more. And so I feel very much at home. So my task this morning is to share with you some ideas on how we can address tobacco control with a new leadership mindset. And let me state at the beginning, I'm not here to persuade, but simply to steer the glass. And I firmly believe Nepalese solutions solve Nepalese problems best. I think this approach that we often take, where we look at any situation as a case of conviction, overcoming constraints, and working under circumstances. We are going to win this fight against the use of tobacco because we believe that at the end, people will choose life over that. But then we need to be mindful that we should not confuse motion and progress. A rocking horse, rocking horse moves that way. It keeps moving, but does not move forward. So we hope our children, and I use here 3 horses to represent the household or families, communities, and government working together. Our children will grow up not knowing what tobacco is, and we look forward to the day when no one will remember what tobacco is. Now, you might think that that's something beyond imagination, but I think we're all old enough to remember there was a time when you board a plane, they will ask you smoking or non-smoking, right? They don't do that anymore. And there are restaurants that ask you smoking or non-smoking. But we do hope we'll reach this stage. Because we're in Nepal, I use the summit that households, communities, and governments working together. This is not what we would like to happen. To me, the strategic issue is this one. Do we have 29 million problems or do we have 29 million solutions? Your population is 29 million. Are they problems or are they solutions? There's one principle we follow in leadership that's very simple. It's this one. Just be yourself. Because there are many studies around the world, people were asked, what is the number one trait that you look for in a leader? And you would think that different cultures have different preferences, but there was one trait that was universal. Everyone wanted that, and that was integrity. And what is integrity? It comes from the root word integral, which means one. What is inside is the same as what is outside. But we have people who are like this. How are you? What am I doing? I'm shaking the hand of somebody, but I'm waving somewhere else. And we do that oftentimes with our cell phones. We're talking with somebody, the cell phone rings, and we answer. And we just told that person, this call is more important than you. So integrity simply means being one. Because when you look at these leaders, I think you will recognize who they are. Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa. I don't think they went through a leadership school. I don't think they took any seminar or workshop at Johns Hopkins on leadership. So how did they become good leaders? They were just being themselves. So we need to ask ourselves constantly, a leader is a learner. Could there be more than one right answer? And I think if we do that, life would be very different. You are the key to a smoke-free generation in Nepal. Why? The people of Nepal need you to mobilize public support, create stronger laws on tobacco control, advocate for stronger enforcement, and act as a bridge to the future and the rest of the world. The Welch Library, the School of Public Health Library, the College of Medicine Library of the University of Johns Hopkins just closed. I was shocked. The president created a committee last year to study how. I visited the library the other week before I came here. There were no more books. Why did they close the library? Because they discovered that our library is now our laptops. So things have changed, and we need to look at what is happening in the rest of the world. Why do we need to mobilize public support? If I ask you, imagine you're the Minister of Agriculture in Nepal. Who produces food in Nepal? The ministry or the farmers? Or the farmers. True. That's clear. If you are the Minister of Health in Nepal, and I ask you, who produces health in Nepal? The people or the Ministry of Health? Then we pause and say, maybe it is the people. So who are the primary producers of health? Doctors, nurses, communities, or families? And we say, families and communities are the primary producers of health. In terms of what they eat, whether they exercise, whether they smoke, consume alcohol, wear helmets, everything that they do produces health. Now, how feasible is it for a health worker to be present when someone gets HIV or tuberculosis? Don't do that, you get HIV. It's the individual. So when you ask yourself, which category of health provider is the biggest number worldwide? Doctors, nurses, midwife, extension? workers, traditional healers? Our answer at Hopkins is mothers. Mothers are our number one healthcare provider in the world because they take care of children 24/7, okay? They don't take any vacation. And the family, the uncle, the grandmother, all of them are primary producers of health. Now, the present health system is perfectly designed to produce our present results. Whatever is the health situation in Nepal, that is the product of your current health system. And if you're happy with the current result, keep it, don't change. But if you want better results, we may have to change the system. But by system, we don't just mean the Ministry of Health. We mean the mindsets, the people's way of looking at the world. And Albert Einstein has been credited with his quote, the problems that we face cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. The problems that we face today, we produce them. So we need to differentiate health systems from sickness care. And many times people say, what is your health system? And they talk, we have 70 government hospitals, 800 government clinics, 4,000 health posts. No mention of private practitioners, no mention of NGOs, no mention of mothers. To them, the health system is all government. But when you look at it, in Hopkins, we say hospitals, not really the health system. It's the sickness care. You go there when you're sick. You don't necessarily come out healthy. So we need to look into health promotion and disease prevention. And that is where tobacco control comes in. Which one is part of the health system? Schools, mass media, communities and households. Which one? Definitely. But we should never say our healthcare system is the health system. Because the tobacco industry is part of the health system, but their contribution is negative. The gun industry is part of the health system, but their contribution is negative. So perhaps this should be our model, where we consider the mass media, and I believe there are some representatives of the mass media here. They're very much part of the health system. Which would you rather have? Institutions fight disease to save the people, or institutions enable people to act and fight the disease? Which do you prefer? The first or the second? The second. Which one do you follow? That's a question for us. But when we look at leadership, we cannot look at leadership separate from the followers. They come together. And we call it a leadership dyad. Just like a couple, we cannot separate them. It's hard. Now, leaders can be transactional or transformational. Transformational means they bring about profound change. Transactional means vote for me and I'll give you roads, bridges, schools, jobs. Now, when people are transactional and the leaders are transactional, it's a bargaining situation, right? When leaders are transformational but the followers are transactional, it's a long march. Like Comrade Mao Zedong marched for 2,000 miles during the revolution. What do I mean? A long struggle. But when people are looking for change, people are transformational, but the leaders are still transactional, the result is a revolution. True people power is when both are transformational. So we never study leaders alone. We also study leaders and their followers. One of my favorite slides, to grow up, one needs to grow down as well. It is the roots that are very crucial in development. And sometimes I say the strength of a boxer's leg the strength of a boxer depends on his leg, not on the arms, because the power of his punch comes from the legs. And that's what we mean by the foundation and mindset. But I worry every time I come to Nepal. I worry because I could hear the clock ticking. You have, unfortunately, what research and intelligence reports all over the world say as the number one predictor of social disorder. All over the world, we're seeing conflicts, people moving away or fighting each other. And one of the reason or indicator is what they call the youth bulge. And what is the youth bulge? The proportion of people between 15 and 35. When that population is big relative to the rest of the population and the economy is not growing fast enough, they become vulnerable to manipulation because they don't have jobs, they don't have opportunities. One sad fact, I see country after country, the young people leave. And so we need to know that the clock is ticking and try to avoid this country. This is probably the most important slide I'll show you. And what does it say? Where do leaders operate? On the first level, you have easy to do. Then what's difficult, that's impossible and beyond imagination. What's your answer? From our point of view, leaders don't do what is simple. So if people say fighting the tobacco industry is difficult, that's what we should do. Leaders do what is difficult, what is impossible, what is beyond imagination. So to achieve significant tasks, we need to leave our comfort zone. And comfort zone is what you do every day. But if you keep doing the same things, you're going to get the same results. So if you want something you've never had, you need to do something you've never done before. Now, I'll be surprised if any of you can show me a roll of film today, or a floppy disk, or a cassette tape. Anybody have one? But you remember that? I grew up in a world of telegrams. And you know what a telegram is? A piece of paper, 25 words, 2 days old, usually bad news. Okay, I'm coming, send money. Today, when I was a kid, if you tell me sometime in the future, people will carry something in the pocket and you can send SMS, text anywhere in the world. This is science fiction. You can use it as a camera, you can use it as a video, you can access something called Google. But we have this because we have leaders who work beyond imagination. In short, leaders don't do what is easy. So given that, you don't remember this? I don't know if you remember this overhead projector or telephone booths. I used to make long distance call. You have to go to the post office and you have to wait for an hour to get a connection. We don't have those anymore because we have this. And I read the New York Times this morning while having breakfast here in living color. Now, the European Union, to me, is an example. Out of World War II, France and Germany fought. They were enemies, but now they have a common currency. And all of this is really beyond imagination. What is difficult, impossible, beyond imagination. My last few slides to talk about three concepts: coping, management, and leadership. What is coping? They're part of one circle. Coping is solving problems. Management is maintaining standards, and leadership. So coping is reactive. You solve problems and they come out. It's putting out fires. When there's a fire, you put it out. But when coping is dominant, is it good? No, it's not. Because that is why you have a crisis management mode all the time. People don't think ahead. Now, the net results, the problems multiply because error chains are created. Management is about dealing with complexity. It's a more proactive. But management work to ensure standard, not to bring about change. They don't like change. Managers don't like change. They want things to be predictable. So in the airline industry, you must check in 2 hours before an international flight. The food must be on board the aircraft before departure. But when management is dominant, is it good? No. Why? The rules become more complex and rigid, and you develop a bureaucracy. That's what is a bureaucrat? Just a joke. I hope I won't offend anybody. A bureaucrat is one who wakes up in the middle of the night from a dream and says, I said no. It's almost automatic. I said no, meaning to say don't do it. So what happens when management becomes too dominant? We develop a bureaucracy. But leadership means raising performance to a higher level. This is a farmer. You think he reads management textbooks? He understands animal, insect, the plants, the weather? He doesn't. Factories need management. But leadership is all about transformative change. So when you look at it, which one is better, management or leadership? We need both. We need both, and we need to balance it. Minimize coping. We probably cannot eliminate it. We are all married. Sorry. So what happens when leadership is strong? The organization becomes more creative. But too much leadership is also not good because it means too much change. So good leadership must always be supported by good management. Otherwise, you're going to have tension, stress, and burnout. So this is the ideal. Minimal coping, strong leadership supported by good management. My last point, you might be surprised. We reviewed the literature on leadership. And we discovered something. The military and business studied leadership. They discovered that the most important leaders are the ones below, not the ones on top. Why? See, in the army, they have an expression, armies are run by surgeons and navies by chiefs. Why? Jawan, I think in Hindi they call it Jawan, the surgeon. Where does combat happen? In headquarters or below? and the quality of your leadership below is a major factor. So let me end with this thought. Believe you can make a difference, and you will. And share with you a story I discovered. It's one of my sports. There was a young American fencer who dreamt of becoming the national champion. And a famous fencing master came to his school. They practiced for 1 hour. After 1 hour, he said, "How did I do?" He was expecting a pat in the back. "You're good." And he was shocked. The fencing master looked at him and said, "You lack the fire. You don't have fire in your belly." You know the expression fire in the belly means fighting spirit. That's the mindset of a leader, is always fighting spirit. Said, "You don't have fire in your belly." He was devastated. He sold his fencing equipment, never fenced again. A few years after, he met this fencing master in a social occasion. And he asked him, "You know, many years ago I dreamt becoming the national champion. You came to my school. After practice, you told me I don't have fire in the belly. I don't have fighting spirit. How did you know?" And the fencing master said, "I didn't know. Why did you tell me that? I tell that to everybody." And he said, "How could you? Because of what you said, I sold my..." And he stopped. He realized what the fencing master was saying. If you really have fire in your belly, if someone tells you you're no good, what do? "No, let's fight again." What did you do? He gave up. My dear friends, do you have fires in your bellies? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your impressive presentation. And now I would like to call upon Professor Hank Cholobuka, and he will explain how tobacco taxes can contribute in sustainable development.
So I'm going to talk about something that I think, when you think about one of the slides that Ben presented with the issues about where leaders should be working, easy areas, the things that look difficult, the things that look impossible. I think what I'm going to talk about is something that fits into that area that a lot of people perceive as somewhere between difficult and impossible. And that's the idea of raising tobacco taxes and why tobacco tax increases can be a very effective tool for sustainable development. So I think probably everybody is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, so 17 different targets. I think when you start to look at the different SDGs, the one thing that really cuts across a lot of those is going to be the value of taxation, tobacco taxation as a way of achieving those goals. So what I'm going to talk about is how tobacco taxation is actually consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I'm going to talk about is going to draw on extensive evidence from around the world. So I've been researching the economics of tobacco control for over 30 years at this point. This is something that economists, a handful of us, started on in the 1970s, I think was the earliest research. And what we've seen is that the evidence has really accumulated over time. So at this point in time, we have hundreds of studies on almost every different issue around tobacco taxes that come from countries all over the world, every different region in the world, every different income level in the world. And we've recently spent some time compiling all that evidence and drawing some significant conclusions from that evidence that come in this most recent document, the National Cancer Institute and World Health Organization's monograph on the economics of tobacco control. And tobacco tax is a big part of that monograph. So I think when we start to think about the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the key goals is to promote good health and well-being. And when we think about tobacco, we know that tobacco is actually one of the most significant causes of poor health. It's the leading contributor to non-communicable diseases around the world. Almost every country in the world at this point is seeing a significant rise in the prevalence of non-communicable diseases. 6 million people every year die from diseases that are caused by tobacco use. And tobacco use then draws significant resources from the healthcare system. If we look around the world, what we see is that on average, we estimate that almost 6% of tobacco, or of the healthcare system spending, goes to treat the diseases that are caused by tobacco. That's almost certainly an underestimate. And that's true across, again, countries at all different income levels, countries in all different regions of the world. In addition to the diseases that are caused by tobacco, I'm not sure why it's not moving forward again. Yeah, I was able to do this morning, so it hasn't moved. So where I'm going is to talk about the fact that tobacco imposes significant economic costs. So we know about the health impact, we know about the burden on the healthcare system, but I think when you start to think about development, there's also significant economic losses that result from tobacco use because of the time that people miss at work, because of the premature deaths that are caused by tobacco. And when the next slide comes up, we'll see that this is, again, something that we've spent a lot of time, economists have spent a lot of time quantifying, and at this point, we know that tobacco costs global economies about $1.4 trillion every year, which is almost 2% of world gross domestic product. So huge economic costs associated with tobacco. It was there briefly. So again, part of what we've been doing is looking at what the overall economic costs are. So if you think about the lost productivity that results from the death and disease that's caused by tobacco, that's going to be even larger in most countries than the healthcare costs that go to treat tobacco, and imposes significant economic loss, up to 2% of GDP. Again, some variation across countries based on patterns of tobacco use, based on income levels, but a huge economic burden in almost every country in the world. And then the one thing that we have seen is that tobacco taxes are the single most effective policy we have for reducing tobacco use. One of the conclusions in the monograph, we went and reviewed hundreds of studies that have looked at the impact of taxes and prices on tobacco use in every part of the world. And this picture from France, I think, summarizes it very clearly. So in the 1990s, the French government decided that it was going to try to reduce tobacco use. It started raising its tobacco taxes, raising the price for cigarettes, and at the same time as they did that, they started to see reductions in tobacco use happening immediately. So as soon as the price started to go up, cigarette consumption started to go down. And within a short period of time, they start to see some of the health benefits that result from that. So this particular picture is looking at early onset of lung cancer deaths among young men. Within 3 or 4 years after the tax increases, the reductions in consumption, we start to see the reductions in some of the health consequences of tobacco use. So again, tobacco taxes is very effective in achieving SDG 3 about good health and well-being. Apparently I shouldn't hit the pointer because when I do that. And what we've seen, again, from country after country is that tobacco tax increases, tobacco price increases affect every aspect of tobacco use. So this is looking at Korea, where recently the taxes were increased over 100%. And what we saw is as soon as the tax went up, significant reductions in overall cigarette consumption. And we estimate from the studies that have been done that a 10% increase in price ends up leading to about a 4 to 5% reduction in consumption. Varies a bit from country to country depending on income levels, but significant reductions in consumption. About half of the changes in consumption come from the reductions in the number of people who use tobacco. So we know that when taxes go up, when prices go up, many smokers are going to try to quit smoking. Many smokers will succeed in quitting smoking. And about half of the effect overall of the reductions in consumption comes from fewer people consuming, fewer people smoking as a result of the tax increase. So this is a picture from Brazil. Brazil is another country that has shown leadership in this area, raised their taxes significantly, and seen reductions in smoking prevalence. And then tobacco taxes are particularly important, I think, in countries where there's a relatively young population. One of the things that we've learned is that young people respond more to tax and price increases than adults do. So tobacco tax increases are a very effective way of keeping people from taking up smoking. And almost all initiation happens when people are either adolescents or young adults. So this is a picture from Chile where they significantly increased their taxes over time. And as they've done that, they've been able to prevent many young people from taking up smoking, reduce the prevalence of smoking, in this case among teenagers. The other thing we know is that tobacco taxes are a very effective way of generating revenues. So every government around the world that has increased its taxes by any significant amount has seen an increase in the revenues that are generated by those taxes. And when governments allocate some of those revenues to tobacco programs, tobacco control programs, to help smokers quit, to keep young people from taking up smoking, we see even bigger effects. So this is a picture from South Africa just showing the revenue impact. They started raising taxes back in the 1990s. They've raised tax almost every year. As they've raised their taxes, they've seen their tax revenues go up. But you can see this in country after country after country. When they raise their tax, the revenues from that tax go up. And this is something that's really been promoted as an idea for supporting sustainable development. So in 2015, there was a high-level meeting in Addis Ababa looking at opportunities or options for financing for development. And one of the conclusions that they came up with was that tobacco tax increases would be a very effective way of reducing tobacco consumption and healthcare costs, but also a particularly important way of generating revenues for financing development. The other thing we know is that the way that tobacco taxes are imposed has a significant impact on how effective those taxes are in reducing tobacco use. So I think one of the good things about the system in Nepal is that it's a uniform specific tax. That's the most effective way of reducing tobacco use. I think the problem here, though, is that uniform tax is actually very low, so it's having very little impact on prices and very little impact on tobacco use. But if we look at the different options for taxing tobacco, specific taxes based on the number of sticks or based on some measure of quantity, we see that those are going to lead to higher prices. They're going to lead to less variation in prices between premium brands, discount brands, and they're going to reduce the opportunities for tobacco users to switch to cheaper products as tobacco taxes and prices go up. The key thing, though, with tobacco taxes, specific taxes, is that they need to be adjusted regularly. They need to be increased to keep up with inflation, keep up with income growth, and to reduce the affordability of tobacco products if they're going to have their impact in reducing tobacco use. The key sustainable development goal is to reduce poverty, and one of the things that we've learned is that tobacco use actually causes poverty. What we see is that tobacco use crowds out spending on other household necessities, reduces spending on things like food and education and healthcare and housing. But then tobacco use also imposes a financial burden on the families. As the person who's generating incomes gets sick, they miss time at work, that's going to cost the family income. We see that they spend more on healthcare as a result to treat the diseases that are caused by tobacco. And then we see when the breadwinner dies that the family is going to lose significant income. Families fall into poverty. So in the monograph, we talk about this cycle of tobacco and poverty and the idea that tobacco use causes poverty. So reducing tobacco use is going to be a way to help achieve the goal of reducing poverty. The other thing we know, like I said, is that there's crowding out of spending on other household necessities by spending on tobacco. So we've been doing surveys of tobacco users in many countries around the world, countries that account for about 70% of the world's tobacco users. And what we see is that even smokers recognize that they spend money on tobacco products that would be better spent on other household necessities. So what we're looking at here is the percentage of smokers that respond that they spend money on tobacco that they should spend on other things. And what we see is that this is even more important in low and middle income countries. So again, this is going to help. That raising taxes, reducing tobacco use, reducing spending on tobacco can help achieve some of the goals about reducing hunger, improving education. And we also know that tobacco taxes are a very effective way of reducing health inequalities. So one of the things that we see is that there are significant health inequalities between the rich and the poor in many countries. The poor are much more likely to die prematurely, die during productive middle ages. And tobacco actually explains about 40 to 50% of the health gap between the rich and the poor in many countries. And tobacco taxes are a very effective way of reducing those inequalities. So this is a picture from Turkey. Turkey is a country where they've significantly increased taxes over time. And what we're looking at here is how that's impacted on the lowest income part of the population, the middle income, and the highest income group. And what we see is that the poor are most responsive to increases in taxes, increases in prices. As a result, their tobacco use goes down the most on the yellow bars. Most of the health benefits, more of the health benefits are going to accrue to that population. And because they're so responsive, they actually end up bearing a smaller burden of the overall tax because of the reductions in tobacco use. So again, these reductions in tobacco as a result of the tax increase, very effective in reducing health inequalities. Another option for tobacco taxes is that they're going to be good at promoting decent work and economic growth, another one of the sustainable development goals. So the tobacco industry will argue that tobacco tax increases are bad for economies, that if you raise the tax, that's going to put people out of work, it's going to lead to massive job losses. But what we see is that the story is actually the opposite. When governments raise taxes, when governments implement tobacco control policies, what we actually see is a net increase in employment in most countries around around the world. So what happens is as the tax goes up, people reduce their tobacco use. There is some job loss in the tobacco sector, but what happens is the money people used to spend on tobacco gets spent on other consumer goods. The government spends its new tax revenues on very labor-intensive sorts of activities. And what you end up seeing is that there's a positive impact in terms of more job gains than lost in the tobacco-specific sector. And the last thing is that these tax increases are highly cost-effective, very low cost to implement, very effective in reducing tobacco use, and as a result, the most cost-effective option we have for reducing tobacco use across every different country at different income levels and at different regions. So that's the end. I have a lot of extra slides if we want to talk about more things and details.
Thank you very much. Professor Benjamin and Professor Frank has shared the ground and in the basis of which we can discuss furthermore. So after listening to the professors, it's our turn to share our ideas, thoughts and experiences. हामीसँग इन्टरप्रेटर पनि भएको हुनाले अबको डिस्कसनलाई नेपालीमा अघि बढाउने कोसिस गर्दैछौँ। जस्तो हामीसँग युवा नेता हुनुहुन्छ, विद्यार्थी नेता हुनुहुन्छ, डिभिजनका सभापति हुनुहुन्छ। जस्तो यहाँको प्रोफेसर सरले जसरी राख्नुभयो कि हाम्रो डाक्टर ज्ञान कुमारले पनि उहाँले राख्नुभयो कि नेपालमा जुन अर्थक्वेक भयो त्यसले जति मान्छे मार्यो, विश्वभरि जति हेडलाइन्सहरू बने त्योभन्दा 3 गुणा मान्छे त टोबाकोबाट हरेक वर्ष मरिरहेका छन्। नेपालमा माओवादी इन्सर्जेन्सी भयो, त्यसबाट जति मान्छे मरे त्योभन्दा हरेक वर्ष मान्छे टोबाको डिजिजबाट मर्छन्। भनेपछि यति ठुलो इस्यु छ भने यो पोलिटिकल एजेन्डा हाम्रो लागि किन बन्दैन? यो युवाहरूको एजेन्डा हो कि होइन? जस्तो पोभर्टी घटाउनको लागि, इकोनोमिक ग्रोथमा सपोर्ट गर्नको लागि ट्याक्सेसनमा बढाउने कुरा चाहिँ युवाहरूको एजेन्डा बन्नुपर्छ कि पर्दैन?
धन्यवाद। यो ट्याक्सेसनको कुरा नेपालमा चुरोट र अल्कोहलमा केही प्रयास भएको छ विगत 2-4 वर्षदेखि अलिअलि। तर मलाई समस्या मैले कहाँ देख्छु कि यो ट्याक्स लगाउने भन्नुभन्दा पनि जति हामीले ट्याक्स लिइरहेका हुन्छौँ त्यसको 4 हिस्सा बढी ट्रिटमेन्टमा गएर हुन्छ राज्य र व्यक्तिको। त्यसकारण यसलाई कम गर्नु नै सबभन्दा ठुलो हो। ट्याक्सले अलिअलि मात्रै काम गर्ला। त्यसकारण मैले अब अलिकति हाम्रो मुद्दाका विषयमा कुरा आएको हुनाले लिडरसिपको कुरा म चुनाव लड्ने बेला, म नेविसनको अध्यक्ष हुने बेला मैले लिखित र मौखिक रूपमा एउटा दोस्रो नम्बरको एजेन्डा राखेका थिए, हरेक विद्यालय र क्याम्पसलाई दुर्व्यसन मुक्त बनाउने भनेर। यो पनि त्यसैको अन्तर्गत आउने भएको हुनाले हामीले केही गतिविधिहरू आफै केही संयुक्त विद्यार्थीका तर्फबाट पनि केही गतिविधि गरिरहेका छौँ। र मलाई अगाडि हिँड्दै मलाई चाहिँ अलिकति मन लाग्यो, यो स्थानीय इलेक्सनको अगाडि हामी उभिएका छौँ। स्थानीय इलेक्सनको अगाडि हामी उभिँदै गर्दाखेरि उम्मेदवार हुने र पार्टीहरूलाई पनि अलिकति अब्लिगेसनमा पार्नका लागि उम्मेदवार भएका र जितिसकेपछि सार्वजनिक रूपमा म टोबाको प्रयोग गर्दैन भन्ने एउटा क्राइटेरिया कम्तीमा निर्धारण गरे उसलाई सार्वजनिक रूपमा एउटा कमिटमेन्ट गर्ने वातावरण बनायो भने नैतिक बाध्यता हुनसक्छ र पार्टीको हरेक पार्टीलाई त्यसमा इङ्गेज गर्नुपर्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ। विजय भइसकेपछि त गर्नु नै पर्यो। र हामीले अहिले भर्खरै यही सन्दर्भमा यो लागु पदार्थकै सन्दर्भमा भन्नु पर्दाखेरि 744 स्थानीय निकायमा हामीले चाहिँ नेपालको शिक्षाका बारेमा केही बोलेका छौँ। माथिल्लो एजुकेसनमा हामीले रिजल्ट खोज्ने, तर प्रारम्भिक बाल विकासमा नेपालको लगानी अत्यन्तै न्यून छ। जति बेला 85% एउटा मानिसको दिमागको वृद्धि हुन्छ त्यति बेला राज्यको लगानी छैन। अव्यवस्थित सहर केन्द्रित मोन्टेसोरीलाई गाउँसम्म पुर्याउन सकिएको छैन र त्यहाँबाट नै त्यसलाई हामीले यसपालि 20 देखि 25% सरकारले टोटल बजेटको शिक्षामा एलोकेट गर्नुपर्छ भनेर कुरा उठाएका छौँ। र यो अब यसको लगत्तै इलेक्सनको लगत्तै हामीले यसलाई अगाडि बढाउँछौँ भने हामी बाध्यात्मक अवस्थामा सिर्जना गर्छौँ सरकारलाई। र त्यसैमा पनि जो प्रारम्भिक बाल विकासमा भर्ना गर्ने टिचरहरू छन् ती टिचरलाई कम्पलसरी क्राइटेरियामा यिनीहरू कम्तीमा चाहिँ यो टोबाको प्रयोग नगर्ने, उसमा चाहिँ उनीहरूले यो धुम्रपान नगर्ने एउटा कमिटमेन्ट मात्रै उनको त्यो क्यारेक्टर भएको अनिवार्य हुनुपर्छ भन्ने हामीले त्यसलाई राख्न सक्यौँ भने त्यसले सहयोग पर्न सक्छ, लिडरसिप तलबाट पनि आउन सक्छ। अर्को कुरा यही बिचमा मैले विशेष गरी अध्ययन गरेर नेपालको हाई स्कुलभन्दा माथि अनि ट्युसन सेन्टर र कोचिङ क्लासमा धेरै विद्यार्थीहरूको फलो हुने, त्यहाँ चाहिँ कोचिङ र ट्युसन पढ्ने सेन्टरहरूमा 5 मिनट जति कुनै पनि दुर्व्यसन अथवा यो टोबाको अथवा HIV एड्स सम्बन्धीमा कुनै हेल्थ सम्बन्धीको एउटा कन्सर्न कन्सर्निङ इस्यु 5 मिनट मात्रै राख्यो र विद्यार्थी पढ्ने विद्यार्थीलाई केही इन्सेन्टिभ पनि दिने अथवा टिचरलाई दिने, तर 5 मिनट त्यसलाई कन्सर्निङ इस्यु बनायो भने त्यसले बिस्तारै केही मानिसको माइन्ड सेटअप होला जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई। तर यो ट्याक्सको सन्दर्भमा ट्याक्स भनेको अहिले अलिअलि बलियो बनाउला ट्याक्स अब ट्याक्सभन्दा बढी राज्य र व्यक्तिको पैसा खर्च हुन्छ जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई। धन्यवाद।
Thank you. In my opinion, problem is not exactly, issue is not here the tax thing, but when we are spending 4 times of the tax amount over treatment of all the aftermath that is caused by all sorts of tobacco consumption or alcohol consumption for that matter. Sure. And he talks about the leadership that we are in between elections are like around the corner, and from his part he's saying that we are committed and we are pushing this agenda that all the contestants or all the contenders should show their character and they should commit that they will not engage themselves in any sort of consumption activities when it comes to tobacco or alcohol kind of products, so that they will lead by example. And then he talks about the educational system and is that at the fact that we talk about all the differences making at the higher level, but then we are very least.
Minister हाम्रो सरको भनाइलाई फलो गर्दै आफ्नो विचारहरू राख्नु
नेपालीमै बोल्नु हुन्छ ठिकै छ। सबैलाई नमस्कार। अब हाम्रो भर्खरै नयन सिंह महर सर प्रेसिडेन्ट अफ नेपाल स्टुडेन्ट युनियनको तर्फबाट उहाँले बोल्नु भएको थियो। नेपालको राजनीतिक लिडरसिपहरू नेतृत्वहरूले कसरी जाने अर्थात् कसरी गर्ने भन्ने कुराहरू पनि उहाँले उठाउनु भयो राम्रोसँगै। ट्याक्स इन्क्रिजले मात्रै सबै प्रब्लम समस्या समाधान हुँदैन र प्रब्लम सोल्भ गर्न कमिटमेन्ट पनि चाहिन्छ भने जसरी उहाँले आफ्नो प्रस्तुति राख्नु भएको छ। मैले पनि के भन्न चाहेँ भने यो मन्त्रालयको तर्फबाट भन्दाखेरि मैले स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालयको कानुन शाखा हेर्छु र त्यहाँ अहिले मेम्बर सेक्रेटरीको रूपमा टोबाको कन्ट्रोल एन्ड रेगुलेसन कमिटी छ, त्यसको मेम्बर सेक्रेटरीको रूपमा पनि मैले काम गरिरहेको छु। यसै सन्दर्भमा हेर्दाखेरि हामीसँग सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थ नियन्त्रण तथा नियमन ऐन 2068 र सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थ नियन्त्रण तथा नियमन नियमावली 2068 पनि छ र त्यस अन्तर्गत निर्देशिकाहरू पनि बनेको छ, कार्यविधिहरू पनि छ। हामी अहिले कार्यान्वयनकै चरणमा पनि छौँ र एक्टिभली हामीहरू लागिरहेको अवस्था छ। ट्याक्स इन्क्रिज गर्ने र जस्तो कन्जम्सन अटोमेटिकली घट्छ भन्ने हाम्रो मन्त्रालयको मान्यता पनि रहेको छ। ट्याक्स बढाउने सन्दर्भमा हुन त अर्थ मन्त्रालयको रोल महत्त्वपूर्ण हुन्छ स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालयको भन्दा, र ट्याक्स बढाउने टोबाको प्रोडक्टमा ट्याक्स बढाउने रोल अर्थ मन्त्रालयको हुन्छ भने त्यसको युज गर्ने प्रोपर युज गर्ने रोल स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालयको रहने गर्छ। यसकारणले पनि अब जति ट्याक्स बढ्दै जान्छ कन्जम्सन लो हुन्छ। त्यसकारणले हामीले कन्जम्सन घटाउनलाई पनि ट्याक्स बढाउनुपर्छ मेरो मान्यता त्यो पनि छ र पोलिटिकल कमिटमेन्ट त चाहिन्छ नै, किनभने हर सेक्टरमा पोलिटिकल सहयोग बिना हामीले केही पनि गर्न सक्दैनौँ। जस्तो अहिले हाम्रो मन्त्रीज्यू हुनुहुन्छ, भर्खरै हामीले लाइसेन्स बिना इजाजत बिना बेच्न नपाउने प्रतिज्ञा गऱ्यौँ र भर्खर रातपत्रमा सूचना पनि निकालिसकेका छौँ र त्यो ऐनको कार्यान्वयनकै चरणमा आएको सूचना हो। यसले गर्दाखेरि के रहेछ त भन्दाखेरि हामीले लिडरसिप जति एक्टिभ हुनुहुन्छ उहाँलाई सहयोग गर्ने रोल कर्मचारीको हुँदो रहेछ। त्यस कारणले हामी प्रतिबद्ध छौँ, मन्त्रालय प्रतिबद्ध छ कार्यान्वयनको चरणमा र एसटिजी गोल मिट गर्ने सन्दर्भमा पनि हामीले कानुनहरूको प्रभावकारी कार्यान्वयन गर्ने र त्यसको प्रोपर युज गर्ने, ट्याक्सबाट जस्तो टोबाको कन्ट्रोलबाट उठेको ट्याक्सलाई प्रोपर युज गरेर जाने हाम्रो मन्त्रालयको प्रतिबद्ध छ। हस्, धन्यवाद।
He did put emphasis on the point made by earlier speaker about political leadership, and he appreciates that the discussion put forwarded by him that increase.
Somebody can answer my queries, like in a country like ours, where there is about 1,000 kilometers of borders out of borders, this open border, and if people just go on thinking increasing taxes, and do you have any experience elsewhere in the world that when we under certain some country increase the taxes, but it's illicit trading, because of illicit trading, this tobacco product are just smuggled into the country, and it is going to have giving a negative impact because of the increased tax. The country is spending money for illicit products. And also, what about this home-based product? How we control, because people may move from this factory product to the home-based product. And Nepal will have I think there are quite substantial number of people, they use homemade cigarettes and homemade tobacco product. So how the economics says, to these things that a country like ours, with an open border, just go on increasing taxes will have a negative impact. People spending the money for the illicit trading. Do you have any experience on it?
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time studying illicit trade and the relationship between taxes and illicit trade. And in our monograph, we have a whole chapter that's devoted to that. One of the things that I think is interesting is this graph, which basically looks at prices on the horizontal axis and the market share for illicit cigarettes on the vertical axis. And it goes exactly the opposite of the way you would expect it. It's really taxes that cause illicit trade. So what we see is that countries with some of the highest taxes and prices in the world, including countries that have long open borders, don't have a lot of problems with illicit trade. And countries that have some of the lower taxes and prices have problems with illicit trade. So the illicit trade is not as much driven by taxes as it is by the strength of governance in countries. So we also looked at how strength of governance relates to illicit trade. So things like the level of corruption, the strength of tax administration, border controls, customs authorities. And what you see is that countries that have strong governance are the ones that have little problem with illicit trade. Countries that have weak governance are the ones that have bigger problems. So I think it's more of an issue of strengthening tax administration, and that when you do strengthen tax administration, you can raise your taxes at the same time. So this, in the monograph, we document case studies from a number of different countries around the world. This particular picture is for Italy. Italy actually used to have, in Western Europe, some of the lowest taxes and prices, but they had some of the biggest illicit trade problems. And then they decided to strengthen their tax administration. So got control over the distribution chain, licensed the people that were engaged in manufacturing, used good fiscal marks that they could use to make sure taxes were being paid, enforced it, worked with their neighbors to try to deal with the problem. And at the same time as they did that, they actually raised their taxes. So they were able to get their illicit trade problem down to a minor problem, a few percent of consumption, at the same time as they raised their taxes. So there are things that can be done to deal with illicit trade, and we see this happening at again, countries of all income levels. I think Kenya may be the best example of a lower income country where they've been able to adopt really strong controls over the distribution chain and aggressively enforce it. And they've been able to basically eliminate illicit trade. So the idea that illicit trade automatically happens when you raise tobacco taxes is an argument that tobacco companies make. But again, governments can actually deal with that if they really put their mind to it. So it comes back to leadership and political commitment and the willingness to take on the illicit trade problems. And then the second question that you had was on this issue of substitution, and I think that's a particularly important issue, and that is something that I think is more challenging in a country where you do have a lot of home production. But what we see is that you can still get a lot of the benefits from taxes. Not everybody that smokes cigarettes is going to switch to hand-rolled cigarettes, to homemade cigarettes as an alternative when taxes go up. And then what you want to do is try to then tax the products that are being used in the handmade production. So grow your own tobacco, make sure the tax on that is equivalent to the cigarette tax. The issue with the BBs, and I think I heard earlier this morning that tendu leaf is all imported into Nepal. It's not something that grows here naturally. So if you were to set high taxes on the tendu leaf, I think that would then translate to higher taxes or higher prices for BBs and reducing incentives for substitution. So substitution is an issue, but I think there are again ways of dealing with it.
Thank you, Professor. हामीसँग अत्यन्तै छोटो समय छ, हामी 30 मिनटभित्र यो प्रोग्राम सक्दैछौँ र हामीसँग धेरै वक्ता हुनुहुन्छ, त्यस कारण अब बोल्ने वक्ताहरूलाई चाहिँ संक्षिप्त रूपमा विचार राख्न अनुरोध गर्छु। डब्ल्युएचओको प्रतिनिधि हुनुहुन्छ डाक्टर लोमिन प्रसाद।
अलिकति क्लारिफिकेसन WHO represent गर्दैछु तर WHO representative होइन, म technical officer non-communicable diseases including tobacco. Very briefly, म दुईटा point agenda flag गर्न चाहन्छु. I just want to flag two agendas right in this meeting. One, let us come to the agenda which says identify next steps to increase tobacco taxation. So I want to limit one to tobacco taxation. Dr. Gankwan, I would like to add that and share the good news with you that WHO has provided a technical report for tobacco taxation in Nepal submitted to the Ministry Ministry of Health. This was done in 2016. WHO र Ministry of Health मिलेर नेपालमा tobacco taxation को लागि technical report present गरेको छ, जसमा नेपालमा कति percentage tobacco tax increase, how much it says if you increase by 100%, by 70%, by 200%, कति revenue generate हुन्छ र त्यसको health implications के छ भनेर we are already one step ahead in this agenda. So I think that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The technical report नै foundation basis हो, जसमा discussions गरेर नेपालमा चाहिँ how much taxes now can be further raised and how much revenue will be collected and what we can do with that revenue. This is what I want to share. Secondly, अर्को एजेन्डा छ जुन चाहिँ हाम्रो अहिले Ministry of Finance हुनुहुन्छ कि हुनुहुन्न. I'm not sure if a colleague from if a representation from Ministry of Finance is here, but specific tax नेपालमा हेर्ने हो भने Nepal is lowest in the Southeast Asia region in terms of taxation. अहिले हाम्रो tobacco taxation is only 26.35%. Specific tax कति छ? What is the specific tax in Nepal? 14.85% specific tax छ. त्यसपछि VAT छ 11.50%. So together 26.35% is what is the tax right now, the lowest in the region. So I think the technical document that the Ministry and WHO has developed त्यो चाहिँ एउटा basis छ for next step forward. Secondly, tobacco भनेको अस्ति मन्त्रीज्यूले पनि शेयर गर्नुभयो. हामीले tobacco नखाऊ भन्दैमा खाने मान्छेलाई क्विट गराउन सकिँदैन, इनिशिएट गर्नलाई स्टप गर्नुपर्छ. त्यसैले I want to flag that the media should be used for second hand and third hand smoke. We need to have this emotional generated एउटा हुन्छ नि embarrassment. अहिले कस्तो भएको छ youthहरुलाई tobacco smoking like it's a glamour. So I think the media, we need to, through the media, it's not a glamour, it's an embarrassment. It's an emotional agenda. You're not only killing yourself, but you're killing, with the second-hand smoke, you're killing others. With the third-hand smoke, you're killing many more others. So let's take it up as an emotional agenda and as an embarrassing agenda that tobacco smoking really is not glamour. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. हामीसँग हुनुहुन्छ नारायण भण्डारी, आन्तरिक राष्ट्रिय हुनुहुन्छ. यो ट्याक्सको विषयमा कुरा आइरहेको छ. टोबाको ट्याक्सको विषयमा यो साउथ एसियन रिजनमै सबैभन्दा लोएस्ट ट्याक्स लगाउने देश नेपाल हो भनेर भनेको सरले आफ्नो भनाइ राख्नु होला. नारायण भण्डारी सर इज द डाइरेक्टर अफ इन्डियन रेभेन्यू डिपार्टमेन्ट.
थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच. मैले नेपालीमै भने सबैको प्रस्तुतिमा के आयो भने जति ट्याक्स बढायो त्यति नै कन्जम्सन रेट घट्छ भन्ने आयो. ट्याक्स घटाउनु मात्रै सिङ्गल पोइन्ट होइन, देयर आर मेनी फ्याक्टर्स अफेक्टिङ टोबाको कन्जम्सन. अरू पनि छन्. म आन्तरिक राजस्व विभागबाट प्रतिनिधित्व गरे हुनाले यसमा अलिकति ट्याक्सको फ्याक्ट एन्ड फिगर भन्न मन लाग्यो, अनुमति चाहन्छु. सर्वप्रथम ट्याक्सको रेट साह्रै कम छ भन्नुभयो. कम्पेरिटिभली हेर्दा साउथ एसियन रिजनमा लो देखिए तापनि नेपालमा प्रिभेल गरेका ट्याक्सहरूमा सबभन्दा महँगो, सबभन्दा बढी ट्याक्स टोबाको गुड्समै छ. सर्वप्रथम यसमा चाहिँ एक्साइज ट्याक्स लाग्छ. टोबाको गुड्सहरूमा भ्यालुमा ट्याक्स लगाइएको छैन नेपालमा. यो भ्यालुमा लगाउनुपर्छ. इट सुड बी भ्याट एलोरुम, बट इट इज स्टिल इन क्वान्टिटीको आधारमा हुन्छ. अब चुरोटको कुरा गर्दा हामी प्रति 1000 खिलीको दरमा लगाउँछौँ. सबभन्दा कम 1000 खिलीको 346 जुन नन फिल्टर छ. ब्रान्ड विभिन्न छन्. हाम्रो देशमा 4वटा चुरोट उद्योगहरू छन् र 210 भन्दा बढी सुर्तीजन्य उद्योग छन्. र यहाँ विशेष गरी चुरोटको कुरा आएको हुनाले चुरोटमा सबभन्दा थोरै भनेको 346 पर 1000 स्टिक्स, 346 रुपिज फर 1000 स्टिक्स टु म्याक्सिमम 1868 रुपियाँ प्रति 1000 खिली. भनेपछि करिब 1 खिलीमा 2 रुपियाँदेखि 1 खिलीमा करिब 3.45 पैसासम्म पर्छ. अनि अर्को सिगारमा चाहिँ 1 खिलीको 12 रुपियाँ पर्छ. अनि त्यस्तै हामी के बुझ्यौँ भने यो टोबाको भन्ने त सिगरेट मात्रै होइन. हाम्रो अन्तशुल्क ऐन नियमावलीमा स्पष्ट परिभाषा गरिएको छ. यो सिगरेट, सिगार, चपाउने सुर्ती, यसरी मोलेर खाने सुर्ती, अनि गुड्का र यस्तै सुर्तीजन्य अन्य पदार्थ पनि छन्. यिनमा पनि एक्साइज रेट महँगै छ, किलोको हिसाबले हुन्छ. सबभन्दा सस्तो मोलेर खाने सुर्तीको 230 रुपियाँ प्रति किलोदेखि लिएर सबभन्दा महँगो भनेको 420 रुपियाँ प्रति किलो छ. र यसरी हेर्दै जाँदा अब हाम्रो रेभेन्यूमा के त कन्ट्रिब्युसन भन्दा नेपालको सन्दर्भमा टोटल रेभेन्यूको एभरेजमा टोबाकोको एभरेजमा 2% मात्रै कन्ट्रिब्युसन छ टोटल रेभेन्यू, इन्डियन रेभेन्यूमा. अनि हाम्रो इनल्यान्ड रेभेन्यू डिपार्टमेन्टले जुन एक्सेप्ट कस्टम एन्ड अदर रेभेन्यूज अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय विभागको चाहिँ करिब 5% को एभरेजमा कन्ट्रिब्युसन गर्छ, 8% को एभरेजमा कन्ट्रिब्युसन गर्छ यसले। त्यसैले यसमा रेभेन्यूमा त्यति ठुलो कन्ट्रिब्युसन छैन। फिगरमै भन्दा टोब्याको जन्य सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थबाट 8.5 बिलियन भनेको 8.5 अर्बदेखि 9 अर्ब रुपियाँसम्म एक्साइज, अनि त्यसमा फेरि 13% भ्याट। अहिले उहाँले भन्नुभयो नट 11.5%, 13%। तपाईँले अहिले गरेको त्यो पनि त्यति आधिकारिक छैन है, 26% होइन, थप्दै जानुपर्छ। 13% VAT हो। त्यसपछि सबभन्दा बढी ट्याक्स रेट पनि यही सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थमा छ 30%। अरूको कर्पोरेट ट्याक्स रेट अरू उद्योगमा 20% छ भने यसमा 30% छ। ट्याक्सको रेट हाई छ, तर पनि हामी कम्पेरिटिभली बढाउनुपर्छ। अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय विभागको पनि के छ भने रेभेन्यू भन्दा जनस्वास्थ्य महत्त्वपूर्ण होइन। र अर्को पनि के कन्भिन्स छ भने अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय विभाग अर्थ मन्त्रालय ट्याक्स बढाउँदैमा मात्रै यसको चाहिँ कन्जम्सन घट्छ भन्ने होइन, ट्याक्स बढाउनुपर्छ, तर त्यसका पछाडि अरू पनि छन्। प्रोडक्सन लेभलमै कन्ट्रोल गर्नु पर्यो। त्यसपछि लाइसेन्सिङ, सबभन्दा महत्त्वपूर्ण लाइसेन्सिङमा यति धेरै उद्योग नेपाललाई आवश्यक हो कि होइन। 4वटा सिगरेट फ्याक्ट्री छन्, 210 भन्दा बढी सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थ उद्योग छन्। यति धेरै उद्योगहरू नेपाललाई आवश्यक पर्ने होइन। यो उहाँ हुनुहुन्छ, माननीयज्यू हुनुहुन्छ, हाम्रो नयन सिंह महर्जी हुनुहुन्छ, पोलिटिकल कमिटमेन्ट हुनु पर्यो। लाइसेन्सिङलाई एकदम कन्ट्रोल गर्यो भने अरू सेकेन्डरी रेगुलेटर भनेको अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय विभाग, अर्थ मन्त्रालय भनेको सेकेन्डरी रेगुलेटर, यिनीहरूले रेगुलेट गर्न सक्छन्। अहिले त लाइसेन्सिङ नै व्यापक छ। अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय विभागको के छ भने यसको सेकेन्डरी रेगुलेटिङ भएको हुनाले त्यहाँबाट इजाजत दिइसकेपछि हामी रोक्न सक्दैनौँ। हामी के गर्न सक्छौँ भने जस्तो स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालयबाट जारी भएको त्यो निर्देशक 90% अनिवार्य। म के भन्छु भने वाइ 90%, 100% गरौँ न, 100% प्लेन प्याकेजिङ गरौँ, सिम्पली नाम लेखौँ, अनि कन्जम्सन त्यसले मात्रै गर्ने, त्यसले केही कम गराउँछ। त्यो 90-70 गर्दा के भने त्यहाँनिर त डिस्क्रेसन भयो कि ठ्याक्कै हेर्दाखेरि हामी हेरिन्छ 70 हो कि 75 हो कि 90 हो, कन्फ्युजन। 100% प्लेन प्याकेजिङ गर्ने, नाम लेख्नु पर्यो भने सेतो अक्षरमा कस्तो अक्षरमा लेख्दै हुन्छ त्यो गर्ने। यति भयो भने सबै निकायको सहकार्य र समन्वयमा कन्ट्रोल गर्न सक्यो भने रेभेन्यू त बढ्ने नै भयो, त्यसपछि यसको कन्जम्सन पनि घट्छ र सस्टेनेबल डेभलपमेन्ट गोल्सहरूलाई सब पुग्छ भन्ने हामीलाई लागेको छ। धन्यवाद।
What I understood from all the discussions from the speakers prior to me, they seem to focus that tax increasing is not the only point. And then he did mention some figures and facts about internal revenue department, and he stresses the fact that the highest tax is on tobacco and tobacco-based products, which is like.
बट्टामा चाहिँ 100% त्यो पिक्टोरियल हेल्थ राख्नुपर्छ भन्नुभयो, 100% गर्ने भन्नुभयो, राम्रै कुरो गर्दा राम्रो भन्नुभयो। तर 90% गर्ने सरकारको निर्णय छ, तर चाहिँ त्यो 90% चित्र नभएको बट्टामा पनि राजस्वको स्टिकर किन टाँसिन्छ सर? यो विषयमा चाहिँ सरकारले
के हुन्छ भने उद्योग विभाग, वाणिज्य विभागबाट ब्रान्ड स्वीकृति भइसकेपछि सुरुमा हेर्ने कहाँ भने त्यही जस्तो त्यसको पिक्चर हुनुपर्ने त्यस्तै त्यहाँबाट स्वीकृति नभइकन हामीले उत्पादनको लाइसेन्स दिँदैनौँ। नम्बर 1 90% छ कि छैन, अनि सर्टेन ग्राम छ कि छैन, त्यो जोखेर अनि हेरेर मात्रै त्यसलाई चाहिँ प्रोडक्सनको लाइसेन्स हामीले दिने हो। पहिला ब्रान्ड स्वीकृति त्यहाँबाट हुन्छ, त्यो क्राइटेरिया अनुसार त्यो स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालय निर्देशिका अनुसारको 90% छैन, त्यसका सचेतना चिन्ह छैनन्, स्वास्थ्यको लागि हानिकारक लेखेको छैन भने हामी सुरुमै लाइसेन्स दिँदैनौँ। तर हुन्छ के भने 100% हामी सफल छौँ भन्दिनँ। हुन्छ त्यहाँबाट उत्पादन अनुमति लिइसकेपछि के हुन्छ भने स्टिकर दिइन्जेलसम्म हुन्छ, कहिलेकाहीँ त्यो साइज के हुँदो रहेछ 70, 75, 90 गर्दा बिस्तारै घटाउँदै जाने प्रवृत्ति हुँदो रहेछ। त्यो चाहिँ हो, किनभने ठ्याक्कै हामी फेरि सिधै होइन, सिधै डाइरेक्ट हाम्रो डिपार्टमेन्टले सिधै एडमिनिस्ट्रेसन गर्दैन। हाम्रा आन्तरिक राजस्व कार्यालय, इनल्यान्ड रेभेन्यू अफिसेस अनि करदाता सेवा कार्यालयहरूको प्रत्यक्ष निगरानी हुन्छ। र के छ भने यसरी म भनौँ, पहिला सिधै हाम्रो कार्यालयको प्रत्यक्ष निगरानीमा उत्पादन हुन्थ्यो, अहिले त्यसलाई चाहिँ सेल्फ रिमुभल भन्छ, स्वयं निष्कासन प्रणाली भएकोले हाम्रो मान्छे त्यहाँ रहँदैन, सिम्पली स्टिकर किनेर लान्छ, त्यसपछि स्टिकर लगाउँछ अनि पैसा तिर्छ एडभान्समा अनि निकासी गर्छ। अनि बल्ल मार्केटमा गएपछि मात्रै बल्ल हामीले हेर्ने हो। त्यसपछि अरू निकायको पनि भयो कि भन्नुहुन्छ जस्तै स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालय, हामीले सबैले चाहिँ हामीले सिधै हेर्दैनौँ उनीहरूको प्रोडक्सन। अहिले चाहिँ मदिरा मात्रै हो हाम्रो फिजिकल कन्ट्रोल जाने, अहिले हाम्रो मान्छे बस्दैन, स्टिकर किनेर लान्छ, पैसा तिर्छ, निष्कासन गर्छ, अनि मार्केट मार्केटमा गएपछि मात्रै बल्ल देखिन्छ अनि त्यसअनुसार कारबाही गर्ने हो त्यो भएर सर
सबलाई एउटा सानो कुरो राख्छु मैले बजारमा अलि के आयो भने त्यो स्टिकर जो छ त्यसलाई चाहिँ फेरि पानीमा भिजाएर त्यसलाई रियुज गर्यो भन्ने कुरो एउटा आछ र अर्को कुरो सरले चाहिँ के भन्नुभयो भने पहिला 90% अब घरले भनेको 90% त कहिले पनि प्र्याक्टिस भएको छैन त्यो घटाउने भने त्यसमा चाहिँ अलिकता म प्रष्ट भइनँ
टाइम छ भने मात्रै बोलौँ
होइन यही नै हो यो उहाँको कन्सर्न के भन्दाखेरि
मैले बुझेँ सर
90% बुझेँ सुरु नै भएको छैन प्र्याक्टिस गर्ने
बुझेँ होइन भएको छ
कानुन बन्यो
भएको छ परिपत्र गएको छ अहिले
हाम्रो स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालयले कानुन ल्याएको छ इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन गरेको छ कार्यान्वयन नगरेको अब कानुनको उल्लङ्घन त हाम्रो राज्य सरकारलाई नै गरेर देखियो यहाँ 90% चाहिँ छाप्नु भने सरकारले एउटा निकाले अर्को निकाले उल्लङ्घन गरिरहेको छ भने स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालयले त राज्य सरकारले कारवाही गर्नु पर्यो नि के कारवाही गर्नु तपाईँले उद्योगले कारवाही गर्दा भने इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन गभर्मेन्टले सपोर्ट गर्दैन भने अथवा तपाईँ त यो नयाँ उद्योगले चाहिँ रोकिरहेको छ भने उम्किन त पाउनुहुन्न पुरानोले छापिरहेको छ भने त्यसलाई किन रोक्नुहुन्छ किन छापिरहनु भएको छ त्यसलाई त्यसो तपाईँले कारवाही गर्नु सक्नुहुन्न कि लाइसेन्सै रोक्नु पऱ्यो नि त पुरानोले सुरे जस्तै उदाहरणको रूपमा सुरे टोबाकोले अहिले पनि आजै उत्पादन भएको
त्यसरी नाम चाहिँ नलिउँ है प्लिज कुनै पनि उद्योगको राम्रो हुँदैन
देखेको कुरा हामीसँग प्रमाण छ डेट सहित छ हामीसँग प्रमाण छ भनेपछि हामी त लिन पाइयो भनेपछि तपाईँलाई कारवाही किन नगर्ने त्यसो
ठिक छ
सरकारले यो यसको उत्तर दिनु
पहिला उहाँको उत्तर दिउँ यो स्टिकरको कुरा गर्नुभयो त्यसको चाहिँ कन्ट्रोल कसरी हुन्छ भन्दा त्यो सुरक्षण चिन्ह सहितको एउटा चाहिँ स्टिकर हुन्छ एक्साइज स्ट्याम्प त्यो पानीमा हालेर प्रयोग गरे अनि फेरि रियुज गरे भन्ने बजारमा आयो नआएको होला भन्न सक्दिनँ किनभने म सरकारको एउटा प्रतिनिधि भएमा विधि विधान र विवेक प्रयोग गरेर निर्णय गर्नुपर्छ पहिलो सुरुमा त मैले थाहा पाउनु पर्यो पत्रिकामा आउँछ गल्ती गरेको त्यसमा कारवाही पनि हुन्छ तर पत्रिकामा के आउँदैन भने फलानाले यति कारवाही भनेर कहिले पनि आउँदैन हेर्नुहोस् त्यो पछि कुरा गरौँला सबै कुरा चाहिँ गोपनीयताका कुरा सबै गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने छैन ऐनमा पनि सबैको गोपनीयताका अधिकार छन् र आवश्यक पऱ्यो भने त्यो पाइन्छ किन पत्रकार सम्मेलन गरेर फलानाले यति कारवाही गर्नु यति रुपियाँ जरिमाना गर्नु कहिले पनि अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय अहिले भने जस्तो मलाई लाग्दैन त्यो पनि हो ठिक छ आवश्यक परे दिउँला त्यो भयो अर्को कुरा सरको के थियो त्यो रियुज त्यो आएमा उजुरी आएमा कानुन बमोजिम कारवाही हुन्छ र भइरहेका पनि छन् हदैसम्म त्यसको चाहिँ विगत जफत भएर 1 वर्षसम्मको कैद जरिमाना हुन्छ त्यो कार्यालयहरूले गरिरहेका छन् त्यही हो एउटा
सर एउटा कुरा नि कति पोसिबल छ सर त्यो चीजलाई पानीमा हालेर एकाध केस त होला हैन
अब त्यो अब हजुरहरूलाई मैले भन्नुपर्छ यहाँ अब किन एउटा स्पष्ट भन्नुपर्छ के थियो भने हामीले यो स्टिकर लगाउन थालेको चुरोटमा त पहिलेदेखि हो जुन अहिले मोस्टली चुरोटमा त सम्भव हुँदैन सर किनभने मसिनले लाउँछ त्यसलाई बाहिरबाट र्याप गर्छ त्यो सम्भव छैन सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थ गुड्खा खैनीमा चाहिँ हुन्छ हजुरले हेर्नु भने अहिले के छ भने त्यो क्षमा माग्नुपर्छ किनभने त्यो ट्रान्जिसनल म्यानेजमेन्ट हो क्या त्यो नन ग्लु स्टिकर छ नटाँसिने छ त्यो चाहिँ स्ट्याप्लरले टाँस्ने गरिन्छ त्यसो गर्दाखेरि जहाँबाट हो त्यसलाई बिस्तारै उक्काएर चोर्ने मान्छेले त अनेक जान्छन् त्यसलाई उक्काएर फेरि त्यसलाई रियुज गरेर हामीले देखेका छौँ र कारवाही पनि भएको छ त्यो
जस्तै यातायातका साधनमा हामी 100% नै ट्याक्स लिन्छौँ है पुरा सुनिन्छ नि है
हजुर 100% हैन
गाडीमा 200
ए यहाँ सुन्नु न अब त्यो यस्तो सुन्नुहोस् अब यहाँनिर फेरि म बोल्नु पर्ने भयो ठिक छ एकदम हजुर
यसमा पनि चाहिँ मूल्यकै आधारमा किनकि जरुरी छैन भोग गर्ने होइन त्यसरी गर्दाखेरि के हुन्छ
त्यो त हजुरहरूलाई नि मैले भन्नु पर्यो अब त्यो त पोलिटिकल लिडर्सलाई भन्नु पर्यो हजुरले कानुन बनाउनुहोस् हामी फिडब्याक दिन्छौँ 100 यसमा चाहिँ 200% ट्याक्स लगाउने भने वी आर रेडी त्यसमा चाहिँ होइन वास्तवमा हो कि होइन भन्नु पोलिटिकल कमिटमेन्ट भयो भने हामी त एक्जिक्युसन गर्ने हो त्यसको फिडब्याक पनि दिने हो म त यो मान्नु न यसलाई सानो सानो फिडब्याक मानौँ न सर यसलाई हामी तयार छौँ
धन्यवाद सर सरले धेरै कुरा स्पष्ट पार्ने कोसिस गर्नुभयो र बाँकी कुरा हामी फेरि अब फलोअप पनि गर्नेछौँ यो धेरै विषय सुनिसक्नु भने कानुनको विषयमा पनि धेरै कुरा आयो र हामीसँग धनराज ज्ञावली सर हुनुहुन्छ कानुन न्याय तथा संसदीय मामिला मन्त्रालयका सहसचिव आफ्नो भनेको मलाई पृष्ठभूमि नमानिकन मैले उहाँलाई बोल्नका लागि अनुरोध गरेँ धनराज ज्ञावली जोइन्ट सेक्रेटरी अफ मिनिस्ट्री अफ ल एन्ड जस्टिस इन द पार्लियामेन्ट
Thank you, Mr. Obeys. I don't think there was any particular comment on legislation or need for reform in the legislation, so I don't have anything special comment on this issue. But so therefore, I would like to talk something in general about our legislation. Let me start with an example: the implementation of. I know the important. There are so many factors which affect the consumption of tobacco. As now we are more focusing on raising the tax on tobacco, and there are different opinions again on the issue. But everyone is, I think, on consensus that our tax on tobacco is relatively low though it is higher in comparing to other products, but still it is lower to the level which it has to be. So, but regarding the other issues, like we are not focusing right now on the enforcement of legislation. But when I was coming here, I gone through our legislation again, and I discussed with my colleague here, and then we said, okay, are there any cases of particular like study on the enforcement or execution of our legislation? Are there any special cases which are like lodged in the court on the basis of this legislation? I could not get any example or any cases or any information. But if we like compare our situation, the enforcement of tobacco legislation with the traffic legislation, it is not relatively, it doesn't like seem as a matching. But if we see the example of drink driving, it has been successful. But if you compare the drink driving to the lane regulation, the lane regulation enforcement is not up to the mark. Why? Because the institution and the manpower and the mechanism to implement lane regulation is more complicated than the implementation of drink driving. And the tobacco consumption or tobacco legislation is also the same, because you have to reach to the household, you have to reach to each individuals, so which is not easy, and our institutional arrangement is not that competent. We don't have like enough manpower to implement this issue. So what my suggestion would be in this case is, let's start reviewing our legislation. Because if you compare it again with the traffic legislation, the drink driving, initially the punishment was like 1,000 rupees, something like that. Fine was. Now they are raising the fine. And the punishment is also, they are also increasing the punishment. Similarly, in tobacco legislation, if you see the implementation mechanism, if you see the implementing agencies or institutions which are not very effective, we are making the manager responsible for the consumption within the organization. How far it is practical? Do you think any restaurant owner is going to punish his own employee or any customer in the restaurant? No. So my suggestion, let's start reviewing our legislation, and especially two aspects. One, the institutional arrangement to enforce the legislation. The second is the punishment. So my commitment or my assurance in this gathering is that, being like employee in the Ministry of Law and Justice, if there are any recommendations from the Ministry of Health regarding this reform of this law, here our Honorable Chairman of the Concerned Committee of the Parliament, she is going to conclude this meeting, so she will make some other assurance as well. My colleague is participating for whole 7 days. If there are any special recommendations regarding the legal reform, I will be very happy to be part of this reform process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sitaram Minister of Tourism संक्षेपमा
एउटा नयाँ सेक्टर त होइन, टुरिज्म पनि टोबाको फ्री हुनुपर्छ भन्ने कुराहरू, किनभने हाम्रो अहिले नै यो सार्वजनिक क्षेत्रमा धुमपान निषेध गरिसकेको अवस्था छ। तर पर्यटन क्षेत्रमा अब अहिले जुन किसिमले अब टोबाको युजहरू भइरहेको छ, त्यसलाई नियमन गर्ने र त्यसलाई नियन्त्रण गर्ने अथवा मोनिटरिङ गर्ने काम चाहिँ हाम्रो त्यति हुन सकेको छैन। अब यो क्षेत्रलाई चाहिँ कसरी अघि बढाउन सकिन्छ भन्ने कुराहरूमा चाहिँ सायद यो फोरमबाट अथवा सजेस्टहरू अथवा अरू एक्सपिरियन्सहरू के छ अरू कन्ट्रिजहरूमा, त्यो कुराहरू चाहिँ सायद आउनुपर्छ होला, ताकि त्यो हामीले एउटा इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन गरेर यो क्षेत्रलाई पनि जसरी हामीले अघि यो कुराहरू गऱ्यौँ अरू क्षेत्रहरू जोड्यौँ, त्यसलाई टोबाको फ्री बनाउन सकियोस्।
You did mention that tourism industry and abuse of tobacco and tobacco products, and in this industry, you did mention that the issue is not new, but he was particularly keen to understand from this panel that what is the practice in other countries, how are they able to regulate and implement all the strategies, and he would like to learn from other countries and do the implementation in our context.
I think we all have understood that tobacco is the main cause for cancer, heart disease, respiratory disease, and other disease. And when we decrease the consumption of tobacco, these diseases will go down. So there are different ways to decrease the consumption of tobacco, and we have all accepted that if you increase the tax, tobacco consumption will go down. And this is the right time, because the next month the new budget is coming up, and our honorable member of parliament is here. WHO has already done the workup. So without wasting any time, follow that draft. Where is that? And we should lobby to increase the tax as much as possible. I think that we should start from now onwards, just today onwards. Where is that? Just lobbying it, get together, who has to do it, and our Director General is here, and our secretary, health tax secretary is also here, since I am a member of health tax also. If to do those activities, we have a limitation of the finance, I can say you, we have budget, we have money, we can, so with to our seniors, and I will request to the secretary and the minister also, we can do the lobby, go to the finance minister, go to the parliamentarian, and I think that should be done. Now it's a time to go for action. No more discussion, no more theory. It is already proved. That's all.
जस्ट सानो कमेन्ट टोब्याको ट्याक्सको जो प्रपोजल छ जो 2016 मा वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्क प्लस WHO र अरू मिनिस्ट्री अफ हेल्थसँग जोइन्टली गरेर मिनिस्ट्री अफ फाइनेन्समा अलरेडी सबमिट गरिसकेको छ हाम्रो मधु मरासिनी प्लस अरू सचिवसँग कुरा भइरहेछ यसमा राष्ट्रिय योजना आयोगका सदस्य सचिवहरूलाई पनि यसमा जानकारी छ होपफुली दिस इयर केही अलिक इम्प्रुभ होला भन्ने लागेको छ र कुनै पनि कुरा हामीले गर्दाखेरि नट ओन्ली मिनिस्ट्री अफ हेल्थ यो जोइन्ट अघि इन्टरसेक्टरल कोअर्डिनेसन कुरा आइसकेको छ कुरा त्यसमा गुड ट्याक्स प्रपोजल अलरेडी सबमिटेड टु द मिनिस्ट्री अफ फाइनेन्स एन्ड इट्स अन्डर डिस्कसन अल्सो विथ द नेसनल प्लानिङ कमिसन होपफुली it will be there will be some significant changes this year.
Dr. Koil, Dr. हामी सबै पार्टिसिपेन्टहरूले चाहिँ पर्याप्त मात्रामा चाहिँ हाम्रो चिफ गेस्टको लागि चाहिँ बोल्ने एउटा ठुलो पृष्ठभूमि बनाइदिनु भएको छ मुख्यतः पोलिटिकल कमिटमेन्ट र ल मेकिङको विषयमा चाहिँ यहाँ कुरा छ त्यस कारणले हामी हाम्रो प्रमुख अतिथिज्यूले यो विषयमा पक्कै पनि केही सम्बोधन गर्नुहुनेछ अनरेबल रन्जुजा ठाकुर सी द चेयरपर्सन अफ पार्लियामेन्ट्री कमिटी अन वुमन चिल्ड्रेन सिनियर सिटिजन एन्ड सोसियल वेलफेयर
यहाँ उपस्थित हुनुभएका सम्पूर्ण साउथ एसिया लेभलका प्रोफेसर डाक्टर डाइरेक्टर जेनरल गभर्मेन्ट अफिसर पोलिटिसियन मिडिया पर्सन सबैमा मेरो नमस्कार गुड आफ्टरनुन आई वुड लाइक टु स्पीक फर्स्ट अफ अल इन नेपाली देन आई स्पीक अदर ल्याङ्ग्वेज लिटिल बिट द्याट्स वाइ माई कमिटमेन्ट इज मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेन्ट फर दिस प्रोग्राम आज मलाई कस्तो लाग्यो भने टोबाको साउथ एसिया टोबाको कन्ट्रोल लिडरसिप प्रोग्राम हो वास्तवमा यो हाम्रो देशको लागि पनि अति नै महत्त्वपूर्ण कुरा हो र हामीसँग अलरेडी ल छ 6 वर्ष 7 वर्ष पुरानो ल छ पोलिसी छ त्यसपछि निर्देशिकाहरू छ र अहिलेको मिनिस्ट्रीको एजेन्डाभित्र पनि यो एकदम बर्निङ इस्युको रूप लिएको छ र पनि कन्ट्रोलिङ पावर अहिले पनि कम छ म तपाईहरुलाई 2-3 वटा उदाहरण दिन्छु तराईको जिल्ला जानुस् सबभन्दा बढी गुटकाको चलन तराईमा छ मलाई यति इरिटेसन हुन्छ युथहरुसँग हिँड्छु सबैको मुखमा गुटकै हुन्छ कोही बिना गुटकाले हिँड्ने हुँदैन 99% पिपुलको मुखमा गुटका हुन्छ तराईमा त्यसपछि अलिकति लेभल उठेको व्यक्ति हेर्छु चेन स्मोकिङमा हिँड्ने हुन्छ स्मोकिङ इज इन्जुरी फर हेल्थ लेख्या हुन्छ तर स्मोकिङ चेन स्मोक गर्ने व्यक्तिहरू गरिराखेका हुन्छ अघि हाम्रो सरले भन्नुभयो हेल्थ मिनिस्ट्रीको सरले यदि यसमा ट्याक्स हाई गरिदियो भने यो कन्ट्रोल हुन्छ भने डिजिज नियन्त्रण हुन्छ भन्नुभयो तर मैले देखेको मेरो बचपनदेखि देखेको मान्छे 2-4 जना चेन स्मोकरहरू छ अहिले पनि कुनै डिजिज पनि लागेको छैन अचम लागिराखेको छ त्यो त्यस्ता अपवादहरू पनि छ त्यो अपवादको लागि अहिले नलिउ कुरा तर किन यो बढिराखेको छ त्यो कुरा अहिले तपाईँ हामी सबैले बुझ्नुपर्छ राइजिङ त गर्ने ट्याक्स राइजिङ गर्न म पनि तयार छु अहिले बजेट आउँदैछ हामी त्यसमा गर्छौँ नीति तथा कार्यक्रमले कुरा ल्याउँछ यो योजना आयोग राष्ट्रिय योजना आयोगको इस्यु पनि हो अर्थ मन्त्रालयको इस्यु पनि हो पार्लियामेन्टको इस्यु पनि हो यो हामी ल्याउँछौँ अरू ट्याक्सहरूको तुलनामा अहिले पनि यो ट्याक्स हाई छ तर पनि साउथ एसिया लेभलमा हाम्रो यो ट्याक्स कम छ जुन अघि WHO को साथीले भन्नुभयो र हामी त्यसमा एग्री पनि छौँ यो बढाउनु पनि पर्छ म त भन्छु 100% बढाउनुस् कि हाम्रो देशमा कम्तीमा हामी देखाइदिउँ न नियन्त्रण गरेर यो ट्याक्सले गर्दा तर फेरि म के भन्छु ट्याक्सले मात्र नियन्त्रण हुँदैन ओन्ली फर ट्याक्स राइजिङको काउजले यो नियन्त्रण हुन्छ भने मैले विश्वास गर्दिन यसको डिफ्रेन्ट काउजहरू छ अब डिफ्रेन्ट काउजहरू कहाँ छ त्यसलाई हामी कसरी अनुसन्धान गर्न सक्छौँ मेरो सानो विचार मेरो सानो बुद्धिले किनभने म हेल्थको व्यक्ति होइन मेरो ब्याकग्राउन्ड फरक छ र पनि अहिले मेरो समितिले स्वास्थ्य पनि हेर्दैछ शिक्षा पनि हेर्दैछ महिला एन्ड बालबालिका पनि हेर्दैछ युथ एन्ड स्पोर्ट पनि हेर्दैछ त्यसकारण चारवटै मन्त्रालय मानव जीवनसँग प्रत्यक्ष सरोकार राख्ने मन्त्रालय भएकोले यसमा अलिकति हाम्रो कन्सर्नको विषय पनि छ र हाम्रो समितिमा पनि टाइम एन्ड अगेन हामी हेल्थसँग यो कुरा गर्दैछौँ कि सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थलाई नियन्त्रण कसरी गर्ने यसको लागि अब एडभर्टाइजको कुरा उठ्यो अघि त्यो बक्सभित्र 90% दिएर 55% यदि कन्ट्रोल भएको न्युजले ल्याएको छ भने कभर गरिएको छ भने 100% गर्दा 60% गर्छ कि
अनि 60% त हामी झर्छौँ नि कम्तीमा। त्यो पनि एउटा कारण हो। त्यो हेल्थ मन्त्रालयको हाम्रो डिजी सर हुनुहुन्छ, यो पनि हामी पनि मन्त्रीसँग गर्न सक्छौँ, उहाँले पनि भन्नुभयो। किनभने सबभन्दा बढी अन्तिम रोल कसको हो? पोलिटिसियन र पार्लियामेन्टकै हो। त्यो यहाँहरूले सबले बुझ्नु भएछ र म पनि बुझेको छु र सबैजनाले भन्नु पनि भएछ। मलाई बढी नै अब के भने जिम्मेवार बन्नलाई र जिम्मेवार पनि छौँ हामी। त्यसकारण किन यस्तो भइराखेको छ भन्दा मैले अलिकति के बुझेको छु भने अहिलेको सोसाइटीले यो एउटा त के देखायो भने हाइफाईमा गयो, सोसाइटीको फेसन भयो। अहिले मैले वुमेनको मात्रै तपाईँहरूलाई दिन्छु डाटा। 100% वुमेनमा 1/4 वुमेनहरू अहिले स्मोकिङको लतमा छ। स्मोकिङ इज द फेसन अफ द लेडिज नाउ डेज। युथहरूको लागि फेसन भयो स्मोकिङ, लेडिजहरूको लागि फेसन भयो। हामी पहिला देख्थ्यौँ कोही पुरुष मान्छे स्मोक गर्दाखेरि हामी तर्सिन्थ्यो भने अहिले त वुमेनहरू गर्न थालेको छ। र त्यसमा पनि न्यू जेनेरेसनको युथहरू, खास गरेर बोइज एन्ड गर्ल्सहरू जुनसुकै रेस्टुरेन्टमा जानुहोस् स्मोक गरेकै हुन्छ। हामी तर्सिहाल्छौँ। यो हामीलाई एउटा सोसाइटीको नर्म्सभन्दा बाहिर फिल गर्छौँ हामी। तर उनीहरूले यसलाई सोसाइटीको रेस्पेक्ट फिल गरेको छ र आफूले इन्जोय गर्दाखेरि हामी चाहिँ ठुलो भएँ, हामी एजुकेटेड भएँ, हामी चाहिँ रिचेस्ट फ्यामिलीको व्यक्ति भयो भनेर सो गर्छ स्मोक गरेर, जुन अहिलेको हाम्रो देशको एउटा बिमारी हो, एउटा डिजिज हो मैले फिल गरेको छु। अर्को कुरा यहाँलाई थाहा होला, सर्वोच्चले पनि के निर्णय गरेको थियो भने खुल्ला ठाउँमा अथवा सार्वजनिक स्थानमा स्मोकिङ गर्नु हुँदैन। तर म एज ए लयर, मेरो प्रोफेसन एज ए एडभोकेट, बाई प्रोफेसन आइम एडभोकेट, मैले त्यो बेला पनि के हेर्थेँ भने त्यही लको चेम्बरभित्र, लको क्यान्टिनभित्र पनि लयरहरूले स्मोक गरेको पनि मैले देखेको थिएँ। र त्यति बेला फेरि मैले क्वेसन राइज गरेको थिएँ, हामी जस्तो मान्छेले पनि सुप्रिमको कुरा मान्दैन भने, कोर्टको कुरा मान्दैन भने अर्को मान्छेसँग हामी के एक्सपेक्ट गर्छौँ? तपाईँहरूलाई म भन्छु, पार्लियामेन्टको हाम्रो बैठक हुन्छ जहाँ BICCमा, त्यसको क्यान्टिनमा बसेका व्यक्तिले स्मोक गरेको हुन्छ। तपाईँको रोडमा हिँड्ने व्यक्ति, बाटो काट्ने ठाउँमा बसेको व्यक्तिहरू स्मोक गरेको हुन्छ। हाम्रो लले, हाम्रो सुप्रिम कोर्टले त रोकिया छ नि, तर पनि त गरेका छ। अब यसलाई कसरी कन्ट्रोल गर्ने, यी मेकानिजमहरूलाई कसरी त्यहाँ ल्याउने? र जसमा मैले के देखेँ भने पार्लियामेन्टको पनि ठुलो रोल छ, गभर्मेन्टको पनि त्यस्तै रोल छ, त्यसपछि युथको रोल छ अनि मिडियाको रोल छ। यो चारवटा मेरो अनुभवले के देखायो, पार्लियामेन्टभित्र पोलिटिकल पार्टी पनि पर्छ, गभर्मेन्ट अनि तपाईँको के भन्छ युथ एन्ड मिडिया, यो 4 जुन एकदम रेस्पोन्सिबल एङ्गलले यदि गयो भने अलिकति नियन्त्रण, अब उन्मूलन गर्न त गाह्रो छ तर नियन्त्रण गर्न सकिन्छ कि भने एउटा आशावादी भएर बसौँ। अर्को कुरा ट्याक्स राइजिङको कुरा छ, त्यसमा कुनै डाउटै छैन, हामी पनि त्यसमा लाग्छौँ नै। र त्यो ट्याक्स राइज गरेपछि मेरो एउटा बेनिफिट कता हुन्छ, अहिले खोपमा हामी खोप कोषको लागि पनि अन्य कोषबाट पनि ल्याउँदैछौँ र यो सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थको ट्याक्स बढ्यो भने त्यहाँबाट पनि तान्ने हामीले अलरेडी समितिले अलरेडी दिइसकेका छ, निर्देश नै दिइसकेका छ के अरे अर्थ मन्त्रालयलाई, र अर्थ मन्त्रालय के अरे स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालय थ्रु अर्थ मन्त्रालयलाई दिइसकेका छौँ र केही कुरा अर्थ मन्त्रालयले गरि पनि सकेका छ र यो ट्याक्स सम्बन्धी मात्रै बाँकी छ। अर्को कुरा हामीले के दिएको थियो भने जुन बजेट फ्रिज हुन्छ, खास गरेर स्वास्थ्य मन्त्रालयको बजेट जति फ्रिज हुन्छ, एनुअल बजेट जति फ्रिज हुन्छ, त्यो सबै खोप कोषमा जाओस् र यो कुरा गरिसक्यो। यहाँलाई खुसीको कुरा हो, यसपालि नै 50 करोड गइसकेको छ। यो त पनि हेल्थसँग रिलेटेड, हेल्थभन्दा पनि लाइफसँग रिलेटेड। बच्चा भनेको एउटा बच्चाको जीवन भनेको लाइफ हो, हामी सबै चाइल्ड हुन्छ, चाइल्डको लाइफसँग रिलेटेड कुरामा गयो र अब सुर्तीजन्यको ट्याक्सबाट पनि जान हामीले भनेका छौँ, जान्छ पनि विश्वास लिएका छौँ। त्यस्तै गरी हामीले के भनेका छौँ भने यो इस्यु भनेको यो नेपालको इस्यु मात्रै होइन, यो साउथ एसिया लेभलको इस्यु हो, सिमिलर इस्यु हो। यसलाई नियन्त्रण र नियमन गर्नलाई साउथ एसिया लेभलकै क्याम्पियन चाहियो कि एउटा नेपालको क्याम्पियनसिपले मात्रै कन्ट्रोल हुन सकेन भने हामी साउथ एसिया लेभलकै यसको लागि एउटा क्याम्पियनसिप चलाउँ कि कसरी यो सुर्तीजन्य पदार्थलाई नियमन र नियन्त्रण गर्न सक्छौँ, त्यसतिर अलिकति हामी ध्यान दिनुपर्छ। अनि त्यस्तै अर्को कुरा मैले सुरुमै पनि भने, यो कुराको लागि एउटा प्रेजेन्टेसनमा उहाँले जुन भन्नुभएछ हाम्रो प्रोफेसर साहबले, मोबिलाइजेसन कसको गर्ने, पिपुल सपोर्टको लागि मोबिलाइजेसन। वी अल्सो फिल, मी अल्सो फिल मोबिलाइजेसन पिपुल सपोर्ट, पिपुलको सपोर्टले जुन मोबिलाइजेसन हामी गर्छौँ नि त्यसले बढी इम्प्याक्ट गर्छ। हामी ल बनाउँछौँ, पोलिसी बनाउँछौँ, पार्लियामेन्टमा भाषण दिन्छौँ, पार्लियामेन्टबाट पास गराउँछौँ, समितिमा विभिन्न किसिमका ल मेकिङ गर्छौँ, तर त्यो कुरालाई जबसम्म पिपुलले अनर गर्दैन, पिपुलको भोइसबाट, पिपुलको सपोर्टबाट जबसम्म हामीले क्याम्पेनिङ अथवा मोबिलाइजेसन गर्दैन तबसम्म हामी इफेक्टिभ के भन्छ नि रिजल्ट हेर्न सक्दैन जस्तो मैले बुझेको छु र यहाँहरू पनि बुझ्नुभएछ। त्यसकारण त्यतातिर पनि ध्यान दिउँ। अरू कुराहरू सबै आएको छ। मेरो त कमिटमेन्ट जहिले पनि छ हेल्थ कन्सियस, अब एजुकेसन कन्सियस हाम्रो समिति नै छ र त्यो समिति एउटा जिम्मेवार व्यक्ति म आफै छु। र एउटा कुरा भन्नुभयो, वास्तवमा फर्स्ट डक्टरको फ्यामिलीको फर्स्ट डक्टर भनेको चाइल्डको लागि मदर हो। अनि मदरको लर्निङ कसरी गर्नु पर्यो भने इभेन जब ऊ प्रेग्नेन्ट हुन्छ त्यो बेला नै सुर्तीजन पदार्थबाट उहाँलाई प्रशिक्षित गर्नु पर्यो कि सुर्तीजन पदार्थ यस्तो हानिकारक छ। त्यसपछि जब ऊ मदर बन्छ त्यसपछि फेरि प्रशिक्षण के गर्नु पर्यो, त्यो सुर्तीजन पदार्थले बच्चालाई के इम्प्याक्ट गर्छ, अनि त्यसपछि फेरि प्रशिक्षित के गर्नु पर्यो, यो सुर्तीजन पदार्थले फ्यामिलीलाई के असर गर्छ। त्यसकारण एज ए मदरको लागि फ्यामिलीको फर्स्ट डक्टर भनेको मदर हो। अघि प्रेजेन्टेसनले पनि देखायो। अनि त्यस्ता कुराहरूलाई एडभोकेसी कसले गर्छ, फेरि हामीले फ्यामिलीमै जानुपर्छ, सोसाइटीमै जानुपर्छ, अनि त्यसपछि हामीले पिपुलमा जानुपर्छ, अनि मात्रै यस्ता कुराहरूलाई हामी परिणाममुखी पाउन सक्छौँ। त्यस्तै यहाँ अर्को कुरा, धेरै राम्रो कुरा भन्नुभयो, गुड लिडरसिप मेक्स गुड म्यानेजमेन्ट। इट्स भेरी भेरी राइट एन्ड गुड कुरा हो, यो म्याटर हो। I also believe good leadership makes good management. That's why we need to good leadership and good management. Both are the interrelated thing. So in future in Nepal, you people mentioned earthquakeबाट जति क्षति भयो पिपुलको त्योभन्दा पनि बढी वर्षेनी भइराखेको छ यो जुन सुर्तीजन पदार्थबाट। इट्स मिराकल। आई फिल भेरी, मलाई कस्तो यसले टच गर्यो मेरो हार्टलाई। वास्तवमा यस्तो भइराखेको छ भने यसलाई कसरी नियन्त्रण गर्ने, डिजी सरलाई मैले भने रियली इट्स यो हो भने यसलाई कसरी कन्ट्रोल गर्ने, यतातिर पनि हामी जानुपर्छ। र टोबाकोलाई जुन हामी यो एसडिजी गोलसँग जुन जोडिया छौँ त्यसको लागि पनि मलाई लाग्छ हामी सबैलाई लागेको छ नेपाल हरेक कुरामा हामी अगाडि नै छौँ। अहिले तुलना गर्दाखेरि चाहे महिलाको अधिकारको होस्, चाहे चाइल्ड राइटको अधिकारको होस्, इभन हाम्रो प्रोग्रेसिभ कन्स्टिट्युसन होस्, हाम्रो कन्स्टिट्युसनले फन्डामेन्टल राइटभित्रै हेल्थ राइटलाई ल्याएको छ, यो पनि एकदम ठुलो कुरा हो। र हेल्थ राइट हाम्रो फन्डामेन्टल राइट हो र यो सुर्तीजन पदार्थ हाम्रो हेल्थ राइटसँग रिलेटेड भएकोले हामी सबैले यसमा अहिले 6 वर्ष पुरानो कानुन छ, संशोधनै गर्नु पर्यो भने अघि कानुन मन्त्रालयका सहसचिव सरले भने जस्तै यो हाम्रो कमिटीभित्र यो काम हुने भएकोले म हेल्थ मन्त्रालयलाई पनि ध्यान आकर्षण गराउँछौँ। यदि त्यहाँ केही संशोधन गरेर अगाडि बढ्नु छ भने छिटोभन्दा छिटो त्यसमा एमेन्डमेन्ट गरेर ल्याओस् समितिमा। र समितिको जिम्मेवार व्यक्तिको नाताले हामी यसलाई प्रायोरिटीमा राखिन हेल्थ सम्बन्धी जति पनि हाम्रो समितिमा आएको विधेयक छ हामी सबैलाई प्रायोरिटी दिएका छौँ र फर्स्टमा प्रायोरिटी दिएर हामीले काम पनि गरेका छौँ। अहिले धेरै हेल्थसँग रिलेटेड लहरू पनि हाम्रो समितिले बनाइसकेका छ र यो पनि बनाउन म तत्पर छु र हाम्रै कार्यकालमा बनोस् भन्ने मेरो एकदम इच्छा पनि छ। त्यसकारण म खास गरेर आजको यस कार्यक्रममा मलाई जुन मिडियाका साथीहरूले एकदम आउनै पर्छ भन्नुभयो त्यसको लागि उहाँहरूलाई म धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिन्छु। र हाम्रो समिति यसमा जहिले पनि पोजिटिभ रोल प्ले गरेका छ, इन फ्युचर अल्सो रोल प्ले गर्न कोसिसमा गर्छु नै। र साउथ एसिया लेभलको जुन यो टोबाको कन्ट्रोल लिडरसिप सम्बन्धी जुन प्रोग्राम हो यसलाई निरन्तरताको आवश्यकता छ र निरन्तरतामा 4वटा कुरालाई यहाँहरूले नबिर्सिदिनु होला। यसमा 4वटा रोल एकदम हुनुहुन्छ। पार्लियामेन्टको रोल आवश्यकता छ, यसमा गभर्मेन्टको रोल आवश्यकता छ, यसमा तपाईँको युथको रोल आवश्यकता छ, यसमा मिडियाको रोल आवश्यकता छ। यो 4वटा रोललाई एक ठाउँमा ल्याएर यो क्याम्पेन बढाउँ र यो क्याम्पेनले मलाई लाग्छ गभर्मेन्टलाई बढी मद्दत पुग्छ। र गभर्मेन्टलाई मद्दत पुग्नु भनेको पिपुललाई मद्दत पुग्नु हो, पिपुललाई मद्दत पुग्नु भनेको राष्ट्रलाई मद्दत पुग्नु हो। त्यसकारण मेरो यसरी कन्सर्न छ यस्ता सुर्तीजन पदार्थहरूलाई नियमन नियन्त्रण गर्नलाई यदि ट्याक्सै पोलिसीमा हामीलाई हन्डिङ गर्नु छ भने हामी तयार छौँ। ट्याक्सलाई बढाउँछौँ नै, 100% बढाउँ जसले गर्दा यो नियन्त्रण नियमन होस्। र खास गरेर अहिले पनि म भन्छु, आज पनि भन्छु तपाईँहरूलाई त्यो गुटकालाई कसरी कन्ट्रोल गर्नुपर्छ। स्मोकिङ ड्रिङ्किङ म त्यसलाई सेकेन्डरी राखेको छु, फर्स्टमा यो गुटकालाई नै राखौँ। यो गुटका त घर घरको बिमारी भइसकेको छ। कस्तो खान नपुगेको व्यक्तिको खल्तीमा गुटका छ, भात नखान पुग्ने व्यक्तिको खल्तीमा गुटका छ। यो ओपन बोर्डरको पनि अघि हाम्रो डिजी सरले भने जस्तो यो ओपन बोर्डरको कारणले पनि हो। तराईका जिल्लाहरू ओपन बोर्डर छ र यहाँ छ्यास घर घरमा यो गुटका यति छ। यसलाई कसरी नियन्त्रण गर्ने, पोलिसीद्वारा गर्ने कि क्याम्पेनद्वारा गर्ने कि एडभोकेसीद्वारा गर्ने कि पब्लिकको सपोर्ट लिएर गर्ने, सबैतिर हामी प्रयत्न गरौँ। म तपाईँहरूको साथमा छु। हाम्रो समितिको तर्फबाट पनि म प्रतिबद्ध छु। एज ए पोलिटिसियन पनि पोलिटिकल एजेन्डा बनाउने रूपमा पनि प्रतिबद्ध छु। यो घोषणा पत्रमा पनि आउनुपर्छ। पोलिटिकल पार्टीहरूको एजेन्डा बन्नुपर्छ। अहिले निर्वाचन अगाडि छ, निर्वाचनको एजेन्डा पनि बन्नुपर्छ र जित्ने अहिले इलेक्टेड हुने जति छ पोजिसनहरू ती व्यक्तिहरूको लागि पनि यो एजेन्डा बन्नुपर्छ। यही शब्दका साथ म फेरि विश्राम लिन्छु र यहाँहरूको साथमा सधैँ छु। धन्यवाद, नमस्कार।
All the speakers and the participants who have actually participated in this very important topics, and I think we come to the conclusion that tobacco has a negative effect in health. It's a negative effect in social life, economic life, and the medical science has clearly mentioned that it has unraveled that it is a public health problem. It causes a lot of diseases which has a public health impact. And the public health science has clearly said that these are the interventions you should carry it out to stop smoking. And the social science, they has also said do this and don't do this to stop tobacco use. And the economics said these are the ways without compromising the income of the country, the resources for the country, you can mobilize the taxation system in your country. So this, I think with this group has come to a conclusion that tobacco is a problem globally, it's a problem in Nepal. And a anti-tobacco campaign should be run in an effective way, and we all are internally, we agreed that, we have been sensitized that we had to do, and time has come to do it. But how? The discussion come to the conclusion that it's awareness, use mass media, initiate a school health program, use the champions, the social champions, use the political leaders, and also do something to stop harming the production, import, and control of home-based production. Do something on this. And also run a smoking cessation campaign for those who has already started, who has already habituated for the smoking. And for this, I think this is the legally we can move. And we do have in Nepal, we do have a legal provision, which is already been 5 years. We have a law, we have a bylaws, we have a directives, and we are moving, but still we realize that it is not sufficient, not adequate. So we have to unite together. All the line ministries, all the agencies have to unite together to implement all these legal means to control tobacco misuse in one way. And also, this is the right time that government is going to develop a new budget for the new fiscal year. And we all agree that the economic science has said that the taxes and also the public health science said that increase in taxation has a direct relationship with decrease in tobacco consumption. So this is a scientific basis. So based on this scientific basis, I think in the presence of our Madam Chair, who leads the apex body in the Parliament to direct Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, and we all the members of this team, along with the experts from abroad, we come to a conclusion that we will strengthen the implementation science of tobacco control by uniting together. And as this is the right time to advocate with the Ministry of Finance and with the Planning Commission, we'll agree that we will, from tomorrow, or even from now, we will be advocating to increase the taxes on tobacco, which has a direct effect on decreasing the consumptions. And that means improving the health status of the people in Nepal, and which is a political agenda, which is a developmental agenda. So with these words, I would like to thank to all of you, and also especially the organizers who has organized this meeting to sensitize us, to internalize us, and to invited us to take a leadership on this, and I believe we'll do it. And in coming days, I think Nepal will be a leading country in the world in anti-tobacco campaign. Thank you very much.
Just before we get exit from this session, I would like to request Dr. Darsan to have his brief remarks. And he is the Secretary of Parliament in Pakistan.
Thank you very much. Namaste, salam, good afternoon to everyone. Really, it's a good discussion by our professors, by your governments, and I think it is really very good. But I just want to share you a few things for my side. In Pakistan, we have passed this legislation in 1979 for the tobacco. And we have government takes so many steps to implement on this. And on this current stage, we are in taxation, just because our professor said about this, 40% tax is now in the Pakistan, and we recommended 75%, 85%. And pectoral health warning, it is about 40% or more, and we also recommended 85%. It will be implemented, but cigarette mafias are so many mafias and they are so strong, they went into the court. So in Supreme Court, it is case, I think very soon it will be decided and we will implement it on this. And there are so many things we have did. In Islamabad, it is a free zone for cigarette. It is capital of the Pakistan. And so many public places, hospitals, even our assembly, I am also member of parliament. So in our assembly, so in Pakistan, we are doing according to WHO recommendations and we are doing very well. And hope in next time we will arrange this meeting in Pakistan and we will see you in Pakistan and we show you all the. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all of you for actively participating in